We were looking for chipflation. Does this jump in PC prices for you constitute chipflation?
I think we need to look at it more broadly because ultimately we are seeing higher costs of AI more generally. So we would have probably seen some of it potentially in the increase in services inflation, or at least part of it, the core service inflation, that's possible. When it comes to the actual products and the chip influence, I think that is probably something that we shouldn't overestimate because, first of all, those products represent a relatively small proportion of the inflation basket. And secondly, also that increase in the cost of chip also represent a higher quality most often, which is accounted for when you look at measuring inflation.
One of the things that we tried to anticipate was the idea that, the UK economy has to import everything from consumer electronics to the compute that goes into data centers. How much is that a factor, the sort of structure of the economy in the UK from an import-export perspective?
Well, the most important part, that the elements that impacted inflation this month, but not just this month, is household energy costs. We had the Ofgem cap increased at the start of July, and that was a 13% increase in energy costs for households, essentially, just looking particularly at the cost of gas. So that was really the key driver of the numbers this time around.
Yeah, what's fascinating about the conversation we're having, we're talking about UK inflation data and having an economics discussion where I think I can ask you about software, because where AI inflation is most pronounced in some respects is the pricing of frontier models. Is that something that an economist looking at the UK economy now has to model for?
Well, we've definitely, we are looking at it. We actually got an index of the cost of AI, looking at different models. So we put them all together. And there's a big disparity between the cost of different models, with essentially what it means is that increasingly companies will need to differentiate which models are used for different activities in order to try and control that increase in cost of AI.
Yes. Yeah, in the United States, one of the stories that came out of capital expenditures of the hyperscalers is, CapEx goes up because the cost environment also goes up, right? There is labor inflation, construction materials inflation, all associated with the data center build out. Is that reflected in the UK economy as well?
I'd say what we've seen in the UK and more broadly in Europe is quite different to the US. The scale that you see in the US has not reached Europe so far. So the pressure on resources like energy and water to some degree is not as high as where you are.
Let's look to the future. Is it likely that chipflation shows up in the UK economy or in Europe? And if so, where would that be most pronounced?
I'd say it's less likely to be the major cause of inflation in the UK or Europe. Where it is going to be more pronounced is those companies and services that are heavier users, essentially. So it would be mainly services that are heavier users.
It's not often that we discuss monetary policy on this program, it's Bloomberg Tech, nor discuss UK monetary policy. But how conscious is the Bank of England of the impacts of AI when they present their view of the economy and their review and decision of monetary policy as it stands?
I'd say it's fair to say that this is not one of the things that they're looking at the moment. What they're worried about at the moment is inflation expectations. They're worried about the state of the labor market. They're worried about the crisis in Iran and the higher energy costs that are potentially more impactful in Europe than they are in the US. And they're worried about how that will be transmitted and whether we'll see this escalation, a further acceleration in inflation, similar to what we saw around 2022. So AI on its own is probably not something that they would look at a lot at this stage. There's other things that will worry them more. Or they wouldn't necessarily see it as an alleviating factor either, in terms of the increased productivity and supply as a result of it.